good to get back with my old friend. Missed him. I love this time of year. I love to be able to do the sprinkling rite, making the Easter season special, reminding us of our baptisms. But I guess we could do that in all kinds of ways, you know. We, in the church, we have developed a very unmessy ways of celebrating our sacraments. You know, we've got these little metal sticks with a ball on the end with just a few tiny holes in it, and you sprinkle, and it's very precise and just a little bit of water. I like this. I like this because, to me, it represents the whole spirit of the season. Easter is a season of fire and water and new life. You know, outside, spring is going crazy. New life is showing up everywhere. It's alive, and it's crazy, and it's filled with energy. And I like letting the water flow. Because to me, it reminds me of what all of Christ's gifts are about. That in everything, it's wild, it's on fire. And we forget that. We are very properly religious sometimes. You know, in the gospel today, Jesus appeared. And we just have the story, it seems very sanitized. Jesus standing there and very solemnly saying, "Peace be with you, my dearest friends." And they all, "Oh, yes, Lord, well, thank you very much." No! These were people who loved one another. These were people who had had their hopes dashed and then realized that no, they had reason to hope. And now they had reason to celebrate. And we were all together again. And it was probably much more crazy and much more noisy than just, "Peace be with you." But we have such a way to tone everything down, make it respectable. You hear in church so many times, "God loves you." And we hear, "God loves you," so often that we just kind of go, "Yeah, okay, what else is new?" But no, that's not it. God loves you! Okay, I was just waiting, because last night, totally out of the blue when I did that, somebody yelled back, "And you too!" And I thought that was kind of took me by surprise. But anyway, God's love is about fire. It is about excitement. It is wild and untamed. And unfortunately, I think with this gospel, even though it is the good news, in the history of our church, we have misused it. As a Father has sent me, so I send you. Why did the Father send me? The Father sent me to bring healing and forgiveness, to unite us with God once again. And Jesus said, and so I send you. And part of that is going to be forgiveness. We hear this gospel and we have been taught, and rightly so, that this is the theological foundation for the sacrament of reconciliation. But the way it's said, or the way we've interpreted it, it almost turns it into a very, very restrictive sort of thing. It's almost like, okay, now the church has control of the forgiveness of sins. It has to funnel always through the sacrament. Throughout history, the church has kind of taken that attitude, acting almost that it had a monopoly on forgiveness, and it had to be very stern in terms of how it was dealt out. Well, it says, whose sins we forgive are forgiven. So if we don't forgive, no. Jesus did not give them something to be restrictively guarded. Jesus gave them a spirit to be wildly generous with, as God is wildly generous with his forgiveness and his love for us all. To forgive is not a right to be jealously guarded, but an obligation to be exercised generously. Exercised generously. God freely forgives. Christ has says, okay, church followers, my friends, my people, go and do the same. Because forgiveness is what will give life, not just to the people who are forgiven, but also to the people who do the forgiving. A couple of stories to maybe make us think a little bit. Once upon a time, a man attempting a bank robbery shot and killed a young woman who was a teller. He was a worthless man, a drug addict, an abuser of women, a cruel, vicious, evil gangster. The young woman's family was Catholic. They hated the man. They could hardly wait for the trial. They sat in the courtroom, their eyes filled with hate throughout the trial. When the jury found him guilty, they cheered. When the judge sentenced him to death, they shouted with exultation and exchanged high fives. They waited impatiently for the day of his execution. They told the media that they would experience closure to the tragedy only when they watched the lethal chemicals flow into his body and his face twist in a death agony. They waited years for all the appeals to be exhausted. In prison, the man went through a conversion experience and begged for forgiveness. The family refused to grant it, saying, "It's a fake. He just wants to save his rotten life." He asked forgiveness again from the execution chamber. They spit in his direction. They cheered again when he died. As they were leaving the prison, the dead woman's sister said to her brother, I don't feel closure. Do you? No, he said. I don't either. Once upon a time, there was a man who counted carefully all his grudges. He remembered all the cruelties of the schoolyard, the taunts from his class when he messed something up, the feather-brained irresponsibilities, as he saw them, of the young women he had dated, the dishonesty of his business associates, the insensitivity of his wife, the ingratitude of his children. So many people had done such terrible things to him that he figured there had to be a conspiracy. Who could have organized such a massive conspiracy against him? Only God. For some reason, maybe it was his face, God did not like him. This was unfair, but what could he do? If God had a grudge against him, that was God's privilege. But then he had the right to hold a grudge against God. So he died, lonely and isolated. Hated, he thought, by everyone who ought to have loved him. I have a grudge against you, he told God on first meeting. But God replied, so what? I don't have a grudge against you, so forget about it. Then God showed him the people at his funeral mass. All the people who had injured him were sobbing in the church. And God asked him, you think maybe you missed the point? As the Father has sent me to give life, to bring about healing, to be generous with love and mercy and compassion and understanding, so I send you. Yes, we are his church. As we are forgiven, and we are to forgive.